Okay. Um, while at Dallas, uh, people were talking about a um, PRC timeline and asking if I'd ever made one. And I no, obviously I wasn't in the most group. And anyway, it sounded interesting to me, so I asked for some more information on it, and finally decided to sit down and do it. Um, this is actually my first video ever, so uh, yeah, this is a little scary for me. I was originally gonna just write it out and post it, and you guys could all read it. But I think this is a little more intense. How's that? Um, anyway, so starting out, I kind of divided out the various um, sections into arbitrary, for me anyway, years. So we'll start out with first um, born. That's kind of the first topic. So I was born June 4th, 1974. I was the second child in a family of 8 kids. There were 2 boys, 2 girls. There were 6 boys, 2 girls. Um, I was born in Kennewick, Washington, and grew up in a little farm town just a little north of there called Basin City. Um, there's really a minimal history of substance abuse in my family, at least that I'm aware of. Most of my family members on both sides are fairly religious. My dad's side is LDS or Mormon, and Baptist on my mom's side. And so there was really very little substance abuse that I know of. There was um, one aunt and one cousin who used to smoke. They don't anymore. Uh, Overall, my family relations were pretty close. Um, I had lots of extended family within minutes, including both sets of my grandparents were within 15 or 20-minute drive. And for a good portion of my early childhood, I had great grandparents that lived within 5 minutes. Um, Major holidays were almost always spent with relatives. Um, and the Stoker side held yearly family reunions from my great grandpa's line. So there'd be 60 or 80 of us gathered together, kind of a thing. Um, from my childhood, I list my childhood as being 0 through 9 years. Uh, the 9 years is kind of a relative number. It started out at 8 because in my church, at 8 years old is when you're baptized because that's when you're assumed to have the age of accountability. And when I was writing it, I found out that most of the stuff that I was putting in there actually started in 9 years old, so I just bumped the age up rather than rewriting everything. Um, During the time that I defined as my childhood, 4 brothers and 1 sister were born. I don't really have a lot of cohesive memories from this time, just general impressions of time spent with brothers and my dad. During this time, though, there was actually quite a bit of trauma occurred, along with some bullying, at least what's defined as bullying now. And this is actually where most of my memories are centered around. I started elementary school in September of 1979, and very quickly everybody involved, me, my parents, my teachers, discovered that I had an extremely quick mind. Um, I can't remember a time that I couldn't read, and I do not recall a time that I ever read actually at my grade level. I remember reading 200-page novels in the third grade, and I remember completely reading our third grade literature book, Air Pudding and Wind Sauce. Yes, I still remember what it is. I read the complete book in a week. Math came just as easy. I was the first person in my class to memorize the multiplication tables. As a matter of fact, I finished the multiplication tables to 12 before most people were even halfway through. I was also doing division by the end of that school year, though most people didn't start until the fourth grade. All of this led to pretty good school life, but I didn't have very many friends. Um, Specifically during this time, I can really only think of 3 people, all girls, who I played regularly with. I would hang out with the guys occasionally, but mostly it was just to play sports like baseball or kickball or flag football, and generally were short-term relationships lasting, well, not very long at all. This also led to a lot of name calling, a lot of pushing, and a lot of exclusion. I was different, and everybody knew it. Um, so I spent a lot of time alone, suffered from bouts of loneliness and isolation. But generally, I had those girls, those few friends who were able to help pull me out of it. This is also, I just like to point out that when I had my first kiss, second grade, and yeah, she was cute. Um, I grew up on a farm, and this is where a lot of my traumas and injuries happened because, come on, it's a farm. Stuff happens. When I was five, my family lost our family farm due to some bad crop choices and other issues. And my dad went to work for a new farmer in the area who was trying to um, raise orchards, become an orchardist, specifically apples and cherry orchards. So at age 7, me and my two brothers, older brother aged 8 and my younger brother aged 5, went to work with dad, um, mostly to help out the family, but also because I think my mom wanted us out of her hair. Um, During this time, I helped plant orchards. I laid out irrigation lines and changed irrigation lines, helped build a food processing plant, and basically just was a farm kid for the next 4 years. Um, I had a lot of interesting moments on the farm, um, being run over by tractors and trailers and pickups, fingers and thumbs getting jammed into irrigation pipes, falling off of buildings and farm equipment, jumping off of farm buildings and farm equipment, um, and generally just being active, an active boy. And when you're an active boy who kind of likes trouble, you tend to have issues. We didn't know what concussions were back then, and I just generally just picked myself up, shoved something into whatever was bleeding, and kept going, you know. And I'd like to make a side note here, kind of when this started. I didn't really have much common sense. Common sense was a far distant second place to having fun, and so if it was something fun or could be construed as fun, then I generally was involved in it, whether it would hurt or not. Um, to give you a bit of an idea on this, one of my most prominent memories occurred when I was in the third grade. Part of the reason I remember that is because I didn't get to play t-ball that year, and that was when t-ball started. Um, my brothers and I were playing tag on a broken down spud digger. This is a big piece of farming equipment that's used to dig up potatoes. When my brother surprised me and pushed me off the edge, um, I fell about 8 feet. Um, Landed on the sharp rail that was running up the side of the um, equipment to funnel up the dug up potatoes, and I landed head first. Uh, I flipped over the rail and then landed dropped a couple more feet to land on my rear end. I sat there. I remember sitting there for a second trying to figure out what the heck had just happened. And then all of a sudden, this big sheet of red just covered my eyes, and I started freaking out. Um, my brother comes rushing down, trying to figure out what's wrong, helps me up, drags me into the house where my aunt's at. So she'd been babysitting us, and she was in watching my younger sister and my youngest brothers. And then my aunt got hysterical when she saw me just in the bathroom trying to clean up the mess, and I still hadn't really quite clicked what was going on until all of a sudden my older brother yells, "Holy cow, I can see his skull." And that didn't go over very well. I freaked out, sure I was going to die and that my life was over and it wasn't fair and all these things. Um, long story short, there was a long trip to the ER that resulted in 163 stitches. Um, that's a lot. That's a huge number. I realize that, but it's the number that I remember. Uh, it's the one that's always stuck with me for as long as I can think. Um, and the really funny thing was, is I was pretty sure that I was going to be wearing a blue cloth sewed to my forehead for the several weeks, which I was amazed when they actually pulled it off. Um, this didn't really traumatize me. Heck, for a week I was even pretty popular at school because I could show off my scar and all the stitches. It was pretty cool. Um, but it's an example of what happened to me quite often when I was young. um, my middle years, I define as age 10 through 15. This is a pretty short window. I recognize that, but it covers some of my least favorite years of my life. Fourth grade to to 8th grade, and frankly, I just generally try to forget about these years. Um, during these years, my last sibling was born. Um, I also lost one of my uncles to a helicopter accident, um, and um, two of my mom's sisters, two of my aunts. One got divorced first and then remarried, and another of them got married. So family dynamics were changing just a little bit, but family we were still pretty close. We visited, we met during holidays. Um, Grandparents were pretty common. Had a pretty common place in my life. Um, this is also the only time we ever moved during my childhood. Um, Actually, it was the only time that I moved until I grew up and left the house. Um, First, we lived on a hill where I was born at and lived for my first almost 12 years. And then after my 6th grade year, we moved down off the hill and were um, a lot closer to my grandparents and lived on a small farm about 25 acres. Um, and then that winter, so this the winter of my 7th grade year, we moved from a single wide trailer into a double wide trailer, and I remember that because it was really cold and I had to help outside and it sucked. Um, my dad no longer worked for the farmer. Instead, he'd come to work for a bean processing plant, and as my mom used to say, there was no reason to stay and a whole lot of reasons to leave, and so we left where I'd been staying and moved down. Um, the 25-acre farm that we lived on was mostly cared for by the three older boys. We actually did a lot of the stuff around this time. Um, Younger brothers weren't really big enough to be able to help very much, and my oldest sister was helping around in the house. Um, uh, I was um, I don't remember what I was going to say. Um, anyway, so moving on. This is why I wrote it all down, so I didn't have to extrapolate on things. Friendships remained pretty scarce, um, but the friends I had were pretty loyal. I lost two of the girlfriends, so girl friends, two words, but gained two friends that were guys. Though for a little bit of time there, they were mainly my friends because they didn't tease me like everybody else did. By the end of this time, I was entering high school and friendships were becoming more solid. Um, I think mainly because people realized that I didn't care if they liked me or not. Um, Middle school was hard. Frankly, it was hell. Fights, name calling, and pushing matches were all common, and there were more subtle forms of bullying that was pretty common as well. Uh, Generally, I believe kids this age are hard on everybody, including themselves. But I think I was especially a big target because I was different, and I took pride in being different, and that bothered a lot of the kids. Um, this wasn't all bad though. Don't get me wrong on that. I had good points during this time too. Um, I had sports which I was reasonably good at, and and frankly, I had school, and most of the people that did the bullying didn't share classes with me. I was in all of the advanced classes. I took the highest level classes starting in grade school. As soon as they offered the advanced coursework in 5th grade, all the way up through middle school, I took every advanced class that they had offered. I remember during my 4th grade year, I tested at a reading level higher than 12th grade. They actually didn't have a scale for me. Um, I remember there was a readathon, and I turned in 170 or 180 books that I'd read in like a 2 month period. And I'm not talking little books. I'm not talking your little, you know, children's readers things. I'm talking novels, 150 plus pages, you know, plot lines and everything involved. And people were amazed. And frankly, they were a little, wait, you couldn't have done this. And my mom was, yeah, no, he does, and it's true. I didn't ever go anywhere without a book. I read a lot, um, and it it followed along also with like my math assignments. I remember I had a teacher in the eighth grade who was really frustrated because he would give out the assignment. He'd write the assignment on the board at the beginning of the class, and I wouldn't pay attention in class to what he was explaining. I would go and look at the book and read the book and see the examples, and I'd finish the math assignment before I left class. Um, and I didn't just do 1 through 20 odd problems. I did 1 through 20. Um, I really enjoyed my education. Um, I was still a farm kid though, and I still worked on farms all summer. As I said though, I also got into sports at this time. In grade school, my sports were mostly just baseball. But as I got into junior high, I tried basketball for 1 year and found out that that was not a good idea. Me and basketball don't get along. Um, I have a better chance of closing my eyes and praying and making a basket than I actually have having looking at it and trying to make a basket. Um, but football became a pretty mainstay in my life, as well as baseball in the spring. Um, Injuries though, they seem to multiply. My mom, we used to joke, was on a first name basis with the emergency room doctors. There were standard farm issues, nails through appendages, especially feet. Tractor mishaps, yeah, I still got run over. Motorcycle crashes, which I know at least one of my mom doesn't know about, which is a good thing. Um, Along with some more not so common ones, including being run over by a semi truck that my grandpa drove, um, which led to multiple trips to the ER, especially during the summer. During the school year, I was a little more contained because of the activities I did at school, and so injuries were a little more rare. Um, but I still managed to go see the doctor on a regular basis, including for a pinched nerve. That one really scared me. That was the first time I ever rode in an ambulance, and when you can't feel your whole left side for a good 3 or 4 hours, you get a little freaked out as an eighth grader. Um, I had a dislocated finger and my first bulging disc. This was also the point where I had my first car accident. Um, I the winter I was 14, I was driving to get my brother, and yeah, bad things happened. Um, Again, concussions were kind of numerous, but we still didn't really know about them, and so life just kind of went on. It was also at this time that one of the more interesting or more bizarre occurrences, I guess, started in my life. When I was in the sixth grade, I played catcher for my baseball team, and I started coughing, and I started coughing a lot. Um, After a lot of doctor's visits, um, at least three that I can remember, which I guess is a lot for me back then. I remember being at a lot. It was determined that I had walking pneumonia. I ended up coughing for almost 6 months straight. I remember my brothers getting mad at me and telling me to either shut up or leave the room because they couldn't go to sleep because I was coughing so bad. For a long time, doctors thought I was allergic to dust, which, yeah, that wouldn't be a good thing for a farm kid. Um, but that was the start of a phenomenon that was really funny in that I got pneumonia every year after that. Every winter, sometimes because I was pretty stupid. My wife knows some stories about behind that. And sometimes just a cold wouldn't get taken care of, which would then turn into bronchitis, which would turn into pneumonia. Um, but I got pneumonia every year until till my freshman year of college. That was the last year I got pneumonia on a consistent basis, anyway. Um, anyway, I was pretty tired of doctors, and frankly, my lung strength sucked pretty bad. Um, but now we're moving into the young adult years. Um, I include the late teenage years in this because, frankly, I believe they should be. My young adult years start when I was 16 and move on to when I was 25. These years are probably the most volatile of my life. Lots and lots of stuff happens in this decade. Um, I have high school, I have college, I have marriage, and I have kids, and I have lots of various things that go on. First, again, I'd like to iterate that when I got into high school, technically I was 15 when I got into high school, but still, my friendships really solidified. I still had a core of 3 or 4 friends, but now I let, or at least consistently let, more people get close to me. Um, and I'd like to bring up probably the one constant for most of my life, especially my growing up years, and that's my cousin Maya. She's been my friend for as long as I can remember. She's been my confidant. She's been my help. Um, I would like to think that I've helped her in return, but she's shared my biggest highs. She's shared my biggest lows. She's been the one that's always been there for me. Um, she's the one girl that's been transitioned the whole way through. School actually also solidified really well for me here. People pretty much just accepted that I was going to be different and one of those smart kids. One of the big differences is I played sports. I wasn't a geek per se. I wasn't really a jock, but I played sports. I played football and I played baseball, and my senior year I ran track. Um, but one of the things that happened to me that took me a long time to kind of get over, and it wasn't until after I'd started college that this happened, um, was what I used to call a preemptive strike. So middle school had had a really bad effect on me. All of the teasing, all of the name calling, all of the fights and everything, um, made it so I would attack first. If I thought I was going to be in danger, then I would lash out. I wouldn't do it physically. But I had a really wicked sense of humor, and I had zero problems um, teasing a bully unmercifully. Um, I think it's one of the reasons that the bullying changed. It didn't really stop, but it changed because I was very likely to attack with very little antagonization. Um, the bullying, though, it became more sinister in ways. At least that's kind of the word my mom uses. Um, I had a cross burned in my yard. I had a car that was vandalized. Um, I was threatened multiple times with beatings and um, ambushes and various things like that. Um, there was this core group of people that just, for whatever reason, they did not like me, and they were they would go out of their way to make sure that I understood that I was quote unquote not good enough. Though I don't think I ever reached that point as far as my personal view. Um, academically, I did okay in high school. Uh, Mainly, I got bored a lot, and so I, I I wouldn't pay attention in classes that weren't interesting to me. I wasn't worth it to me to spend that amount of effort. So my GPA was not um, what you would consider great for especially a kid as smart as I was. Um, but I aced every advanced class that I took. Didn't matter what it was. Uh, if it was a challenging class and you put, um, I would put the effort in to get a good grade. Especially in my AP English and my AP Calculus classes. Um, I also did well enough on my ACTs and SATs to get a really nice scholarship to college, specifically WSU. And at the end of high school, I was ready to move on. I played sports in high school, and I continued to find myself injured. Um, Football saw lots of dislocated shoulders, um, a dislocated finger again, and baseball saw more dislocated shoulders, and I actually was knocked unconscious as well. Um, I actually had dislocated my shoulder enough times that I could do it at will. And the only reason I know that is because I did it once, and it hurts. Uh, I don't care what anybody says or what the movies say. A dislocated shoulder is one of the most painful things there is. And when you do it to yourself, all you can think of is first of all, how do I fix it? And second of all, how could I be so stupid? Um, Farm accidents continued, including I rolling a tractor onto myself at the bottom of an irrigation drainage canal. Uh, but we're not going to go into those beyond saying that, yeah, I still couldn't seem to keep myself out of a doctor's office. Um, anyway, I moved on to college where I discovered a sad personality trait. Um, I'm really bad about keeping up with old friends. If I see them again, I've got no problems talking to them, asking how they've been doing. I'm happy to see them, but I don't really keep track of them. I don't go out of my way to make sure that people I was friends with, that I stay friends with necessarily. Um, this is true of pretty much everybody except Maya. I've always kept track of her and what's going on with her, even if I just check in once or twice a year. But as I went to college, there was a bit of a scandal of me going to WSU, which isn't really the right word, but it works. And let me give you a little background on this. Um, I grew up LDS or Mormon. We prefer LDS, by the way. And the church in my area was actually quite large. We had, as far as I know, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone that was either a larger and or more active congregation. Um, and there was one constant that was pretty much never broken. Actually, there were many, but this one's the important one for my story. Um, if you went to a college after high school, then you went to a church school. Um, for 20 plus years, every person from my congregation that graduated high school and went on to college either went to BYU or Rick's College, which is now BYU Idaho. Um, at least as far as I know, that you just didn't do it otherwise. Um, you didn't even go to the local community college. If you're going to go to community college, you went to Rick's College. Um, I broke that trend and went to Washington State. Uh, for personal reasons, I didn't like what happened to kids that I saw go to BYU. Um, and for financial reasons, I got a really good scholarship to WSU, and my first year was basically free. There was very little money out of my pocket. Um, and anyway, before I left, my mom told me that pretty much my whole church was watching to see how I would do. Um, could a good Mormon kid return a good Mormon kid after going to a non LDS school? I remember when she first told me about this, I laughed because, come on, I was nobody. I wasn't even popular in my congregation. There's no reason to use me for an example. Um, but multiple people have told me over the years that the only reason their parents let them go to BYU or not go to BYU was because I went to WSU and came back pretty much okay. I still came back and went on my mission. I was still a good LDS person. I still, did all the things that I was supposed to do right. Um, which, when you think about it, that's actually a pretty scary thought. Anyway, my first year of college was pretty interesting. I definitely enjoyed the freedom of not being at home. Um, but there were some decisions that were easy at home. Stuff like, don't drink, which is, a Mormon standard. Um, but it became pretty hard at WSU. That was back before a lot of the crackdown on alcohol at WSU, and alcohol was pretty plentiful. And um, I did a lot of personal growth at that point, which was a good thing. My standards became my standards, not standards that were placed on me by my parents or by my church leaders or anything. And yeah, they were pretty much lined up with what I had growing up, but they were my standards now. They were things that I had developed and listened with, or not listened with, but they were mine. They were my decisions now. Um, there was a lot of new experiences, late night studying groups, late night gaming groups, concerts. I finally was working for myself. Growing up, all my paychecks went to my family to help support. When I was at college, that was my money. I didn't have to worry about it, handing it over to anybody. Um, and girls. Um, I'd always liked girls. I had I'd had crushes for as long as I could remember, but I was always kind of scared to approach girls as anything more than friends. I had my first girlfriend my first year of college. Um, we started dating pretty early in the school year, and we generally were having a pretty good time. I thought. Um, After Thanksgiving break, though, something happened, which frankly I'm still not sure what happened, and we broke up, and I got a serious cold shoulder out of it. I did eventually get the hint, but it took a while to just leave her alone. Um, One of the funny things parts is she's actually now my sister-in-law. She married my older brother, which we'll go into a little later. But yeah, that was an interesting experience. Um, One thing that stayed uh, constant though was my stupid pneumonia. Um, this time it pretty much resulted in me burning the candle at both ends. I had early classes and I'd stay up late goofing off. Um, because when else am I supposed to goof off? I've got to work all day long to get my studying done. Um, so after I came back from Thanksgiving break, I had a really bad cold that very quickly turned into bronchitis that very quickly turned into pneumonia. And I spent some time at the student health center um, trying to get it fixed. I ended up missing the final 2 weeks of class between Thanksgiving break and Dead Week. Pretty much all of it. I don't remember being able to get to any class, but I might have been able to get to one or two. And I remember Dead Week barely being able to function. My mind was just not really in a good spot at that point. And if you've ever gotten over pneumonia, you kind of know what I'm thinking about. And so we just say I like to forget about my first semester. You know, if you care about your grades, whatever you do, um, don't miss the final 3 weeks of a college class. No matter how smart you are. Um, for the first time in my life, I failed classes, and not just any classes, classes that I cared about, classes that I liked. Um, it was a new experience for me, and I was horrified. Uh, I did a lot better the next semester. Actually got straight A's the next semester, but there'd been a blow to my confidence at that point. You know, I was no longer the invincible student who, all I got was A's and B's. That's just what I did. Um, anyway, after my first year of college, I did what a lot of LDS young men did and do, and went on my mission. Um, my mission was not the great experience that most people talk about, though. I hurt my back very early in my mission, and this resulted in a bulging disc. Um, it was not readily apparent for a long time what was going on with it. I got some physical therapy early, right after it happened, that helped me deal with it. But by the time I was, well, by I think it was November that year, it was really bad. Um, I spent months dealing with the pain of this really sharp pain going down my leg, and it finally took a doctor um, finding out that I had a herniated disc that before things started to get better. Um, Basically, I needed to have surgery, and there was a pretty good chance that I would be paralyzed. The surgery was not very, uh, I don't want to say sophisticated because it was pretty good for that time, but it's nothing like what we've got now. And there was a good chance that because of how the disc had herniated, that I was going to be paralyzed. Um, 2 months after the surgery, I went back into the mission field. Um, this was not a good move, and ended up coming back 2 months after that, depressed. Not just a little not just whatever. I was actually severely depressed. There were bad things going on in my head, and I ended up spending 2+ weeks in a hospital. Um, and I got home just in time to help my brother and my ex-girlfriend finalize their plans to get married. Um, yeah, we just won't go into that anymore. Um, it We're on good terms now, but it was an interesting summer. Um, College started up again that fall, and I met my future wife the day before classes started. It was it was an interesting experience that semester, but it wasn't really conducive to studying. Eventually, after being asked 4 times, which again is a different story, Melissa and I got engaged. over Christmas break, and then planned our wedding in a week, and then got married over spring break. And another piece of advice, if you want good grades or you care at all about your schooling, don't get married in the middle of a semester. It's even more than being distracting than being engaged. Let's just say we spent a whole lot more time at home than we did in class. um, After marriage, things really start to go kind of quick. So I'm just going to kind of step through them a little bit. Um, there's a lot that happens in the next 5 years, but it's not something that's necessarily conducive to this uh, conversation, this video. I was married in March of 1995, and we moved into a new apartment. School finished. We did really bad, and so we moved home for the summer. Um, Lived with her parents. I transferred schools to the local community college, and we moved into a new apartment. There's a lot of moving here. You notice that. In January 1996, my daughter was born. Um, I was working two jobs, one for a doctor's office and one as a college English tutor, and going to school. And my wife was working full time for a doctor as well. So actually, my daughter was born free. It was kind of nice. The summer of that year, we moved back in with her parents. Um, and in January of '97, um, my son was born. I was still going to school, but now I was working three jobs. Um, I was a track coach. I was still in the college English tutor, and I was an out-of-town delivery driver for the local newspaper. Um, After my son was born, my wife actually also goes back to school. That fall, we move again, heading back to Pullman and WSU for Melissa and University of Idaho for me. um, that depression that I'd mentioned I'd had coming home from my mission, uh, it it was still kind of there. I never really fully faced it for a long time, and in this spot, shh, and in this spot, um, I basically I failed out of U of I. It was pretty bad. Uh, I remember a class that I took that it was I've never worked so hard for a D in my life. It was stupid. Um, anyway, so I head back to WSU, changing my major to computer engineering mainly because we found out that I liked to do my wife's homework better than I like to do my own. Um, and we moved again. This time we moved out of school housing and moved down the street a little bit into a housing complex and continued with school and part-time jobs. Um, Melissa's schooling is almost done by 1999, which is the end of this section of my life. Um, but mine had pretty much stalled. Uh, we moved again, same complex, different apartment. Uh, but life was kind of stopping for me, and it was interesting. Um, in the meantime, injuries still occurred quite often. You know, even into college, I had injuries beyond the bulging slash herniated disc that I had on my mission. I had a damaged eyeball. Yeah, I got bruised eyeball and had to wear an eye patch. It was kind of funny for a while. Rollerblade crashes, bicycle crashes. I had another car crash, multiple concussions, though concussion was still not on the radar. Um, it's actually a pretty good thing that I worked for a doctor for about half this period. My family and friends also changed dramatically during this period. Um, One of the pillars of my high school years died 2 weeks before I met my wife. Um, she was going downhill in my mission, but it was a real bad thing to have lost her at that point. Um, I lost both grandpas within 6 months of each other after my kids were born, as well as my great grandpa. Um, there was there were some big holes in my life. Um, However, this was also a period of big familial expansion. My older brother got married, um, and I was married, and both of us had kids. He had three, and I had two. My younger brother was also married at this time, though he didn't have any kids yet. And cousins were starting to get married as well, one of whom my wife and I got really close with. And my wife's family saw marriages and nieces and nephews as well. Uh, though most of them were not around me, and so I didn't really click with much of them very often. Um, Now we move into the middle adult years. This is pretty much everything from 2000 on. Um, 15 years of life and some pretty big hardships. Um, for me, life really started changing in about 2000, and I think I finally started growing up. Uh, my wife graduated from WSU, got a good job working for HP. We moved to Vancouver, Washington, and I transferred schools again. And this is where another phenomenon started that was ignored for a long time, mainly because I didn't think anything of it. Um, at least this is where I first remember it starting. Um, I started getting dizzy spells, 2 to 3 a year, 2 or 3 days long. Um, no big deal. I was never concerned about them. They're all easily explained. Times of stress, or I wasn't eating right, or something else, was kind of messing with me emotionally, and it was I'd just back off, and they'd go away, and then I'd be fine for the next 4 or 5 6 months. Um, my extended family was still Well, my extended family started holding family reunions at this time. By extended family, I mean my brothers and sisters and stuff. Um, the big family reunions for my great grandpa didn't really meet anymore, or at least I didn't know about them, and so I didn't go. And to make up for it, the Earl Stoker family, so my dad Earl, um, started holding our own. At that first one, there wasn't very many of us; it was pretty small. But we've gotten to be pretty large now, and it's generally a rambunctious, loud, and fun-loving affair, and it's basically what happens when you're a stoker. Um, I finally graduated a college that I had attended, Clark College. This is where I transferred to when my wife got her job. I got an associate's degree in 2002. I transferred schools to Portland State University because they were the closest one with a computer engineering department. The WSU Vancouver campus only had computer science. So, also between 2000 and 2002, I worked for a company called Sharp Microelectronics. They do a lot of chip design stuff, and they are associated with the Sharp electronics that you know of, like for TVs and high-end laptops and stuff. Um, and in the summer of 2002, I went to work for Boise, or went to work for HP in Boise for the summer as an intern. Um, but once I transferred to Portland State, I figured it was time to buckle down and just get my degree so I could go out and get the job that I was wanting to have. Um, yeah, that didn't happen. My wife had gotten me into mountain biking in 2002, by the way, forgetting that I was accident prone. And 2 years into going to school at PSU, with only a year to graduate, I was actually doing really well there. I had a major mountain biking accident. I'd had several little ones before, um, including several landing on my head. Um, but this one was extremely serious. I did something dumb, and the result was a third-degree separation of my left shoulder and the complete destruction of my rotator cuff. Uh, this resulted in another surgery, more rehab, and dropping out of school. Um, I lost my scholarship at PSU because I had dropped out of school, and so I could no longer afford to go there. Once I'd healed and decided that I really did want to finish college, I ended up going back to WSU. This time, the Vancouver campus, and again, I had to change my major. This resulted in duplicated courses because evidently a course that says 95% the same things is not the same as getting 100% of the same things. And so, with some major assistance from family and friends, I finally graduated college in 2006 with a BA in computer science and a minor in electrical engineering. Um, I spent a year working for a company just south of Portland and then suffered a second herniated disc. The same one, L5S1. And this again required surgery. And all of a sudden, that commute wasn't what I wanted anymore. Um, I was a little hesitant about all the travel that was involved in being taken away from my family, and I just didn't want to deal with the commute. So I uh, had been talking to my brother and took a whim and found a job in Pullman, working for SEL, and we moved back in 2007. Um, the next 3 years were good. They weren't necessarily easy, but they were good. I was working at a job that I loved for a great company, and my wife was mostly staying at home, basically picking up some outside stuff just to keep busy. I had some amazing accomplishments. I rode a 204-mile bike ride in one day, Seattle to Portland, and finally had seemed to have some things in control. Um, my job was going well. I was in the line for advancement and promotions, and generally was ready for my life to launch. I'd even started working on my master's degree. Yeah, I know I went back to school. Um, at this time, all but one of my siblings were married, and all of my wife's siblings but one were also married. I now have 18 nieces and nephews on the Stoker side, and I think 21 nieces and nephews on the Clark side. One was just born a couple days ago, and I think I got them all. However, that's a lot of little and not so little bodies to keep track of, so forgive me if I've missed a few. Um, More than half of them have been come around since 2010, which is why I kind of need some of that forgiveness because that's the fateful year. That's when my life completely changed. Now, you probably notice I skipped some stuff there because now we're going into how did I get to PRC. And that's because all that stuff kind of relates to this question, and I thought it'd be easier just to put it down here. Honestly, I don't remember much of the year since 2010, and most of what I do remember directly relates to my migraines. So I'm going to skip all the trauma. I'm going to skip all the jobs, which really there weren't any. I just lost my job. I'm going to skip all the friends and family and interactions that way and just get to how I got this way. So in 2009, in the early spring, I was riding my bike to work and crashed, and I crashed hard. My head hit the sidewalk and I blacked out. After a doctor's visit required by my work, since it had happened on their property, um, he was pretty astonished to hear I'd been knocked out on numerous occasions and that I didn't consider it anything really major. I got a big lecture on concussions, and we had a big discussion on how many times this had actually happened. Let's just say it's a lot. There's a good chance I've had up to 20 concussions in my life. I've been knocked unconscious on probably 6 to 8 times. Um, yeah, not a good. This is where all those concussions from previous in my life, yeah, they start coming out. Um, in the fall that year, my son Thomas breaks his arm playing football. Now, this seemingly innocent act, yeah, it hurt and it necessarily wasn't great, but it was pretty innocent. Starts the cycle of what the perfect storm that caused this changes in my life. Sometimes I know he blames himself for this, um, but it's not his fault. His fault. The migraines were going to come no matter what. It was what was going on in my life. Um, just as he gets better or gets back to where he's functional, I have used up most of my vacation time and I got sick. The swine flu was going around, and I don't know if I got it. All I do know is my doctor refused to see me. He told me to push myself full of fluids, not worry about coming in, because there was nothing they could do about it anyway. So I spent about 2 weeks home aching, dehydrated, and flat out miserable. And sometimes dizzy. When I finally get back to work just before Thanksgiving, the stress and long hours are going to start building up. I'm behind on projects. I need to get caught up. And the holiday season is definitely pushing in. And the more I try to push, the more I try to catch up, the more dizzy spells keep coming back. Um, they're coming more frequently and they're lasting for longer periods of time, and this is concerning. Like I said, I'm used to 2 or 3 a year, not 2 or 3 a month, not for 3 or 4 days at a time. Um, it's it's gotten scary. Um, by January, the dizziness and inability to concentrate or focus has become pretty detrimental, and my wife talks me into going to the doctor. Um, the first doctor I see was pretty unhelpful, but then I got in to see my family doctor, my personal doctor, in February. After a big discussion with him, he doesn't know what it could be, but he starts a barrage of tests. I get an MRI, an EKG, an EEG. I get stress tests, blood tests, psych tests, more tests, more tests, more tests, and they all come back clear. Um, this is really bothersome to me because there's something wrong with me, and yet all of these medical tests are saying I'm fine. Um, he's also scheduled me for a neurology appointment, but this is 6 to 8 weeks out. Now, my work knows something is seriously wrong, and they've worked with me to help set it up so that I can still work to the best of my ability. Um, I'm put on FMLA, and I'm able to work as much as possible, and then I just, when I can no longer function at work, I go home. However, one day in early March, I feel scary. I feel odd. It's it's not a good feeling. The best I can say is a cold, inky blackness. Um, it's really hard to describe, and frankly, it gives me the chills just thinking about it. I don't like talking about it really. Um, this resulted in an ER visit that had them treating me for stroke. Um, and this is when my life is starting to get interesting. The neurologist hears about this visit and moves up my appointment to the next week. And after our visit, he tells me that I have migraines. Specifically, I have a condition called status migrainosus, um, which is when a migraine feeds back on itself. It makes an infinite feedback loop, which the only way to break out of is an external activation medication in this case. Um, a quick side note here. Um, in most cases of status migrainosus, they want lasting no more than 3 to 5 days. The reason is because after 3 days, your opportunity for stroke goes up increment, or not incremental. What's the word I'm looking for? Um, exponential. There we go. It goes up exponentially. Um, I'd been in a migraine loop for 6 weeks. Yeah, that's just as scary as it sounds. Damage was being done to my head. Um, frankly, though, I didn't believe him. One of the biggest symptoms of migraines is blinding pain. I know I'd had them before. My grandmother got them frequently. Um, but I didn't have pain. All I had was this inability to concentrate and dizziness. So we go over to Swedish Medical in Seattle and go to another neurologist, and he confirms the diagnosis. It's migraines. Okay, two neurologists that tell me I have migraines. Maybe I should actually realize I have migraines. But hey, that doesn't mean that I can't beat the symptoms, right? I can get back to work. I can do the things that I want to have to live my life, right? Heck, my grandmother had migraines and she could still do things. So that's what we thought, and that's what we pursued, and that's what we found out was completely fruitless. Um, in 2010 alone, we went to 169 doctor and therapist visits. 169 visits. And we saw 19 different doctors and therapists. And okay, the dentist was included in that, but there weren't very many. And he's still a doctor. Um, and the end result of all those doctor visits was me in the hospital, suicidal. Um, the migraines weren't getting better, they were actually getting worse. And I was sitting by while the most important things that defined me for 36 years were being taken away. And I couldn't stop it. I remember one therapy visit where I felt my brain snap. I'd been pushing and I'd been pushing, and it was like my brain was a rubber band and it broke. It was audible to my ears. It was a physical sensation in my head, and it scared the living daylights out of my therapist. She watched me regress 6 months in 5 minutes. It scared me too, but not right then, because everything just went away. My brain shut down. I could no longer handle it, and The thing that worried me the most is that if I kept pushing and doing those things, it was going to happen again and be more detrimental than the last time. I was worried I was going to end up being a vegetable. Um, so I was admitted to the hospital um, on suicide watch. I scared the living daylights out of myself. I walked into my psychologist and I told her, "You need to put me in the hospital right now. I just finished planning my suicide." And when I realized that, I had to get out of the house. After the hospital, I tried to put my life back together, but it was pretty bad. Um, I lashed out at the person closest to me, my wife, um, mostly because she was the only one who was still around that I could lash at. Um, I was angry and I was scared and I was extremely frustrated. Um, I was also a really lucky person in that she didn't leave. Um, I'm pretty sure she wanted to sometimes, but she stayed through those first 3 years when life was really horrible, and I was about 2 seconds from a mental breakdown, 3 seconds from suicide, and 4 seconds from a stroke. Um, Multiple neurologists and psychologists, or psychiatrists, and one psychologist who's still with me. I love her to death. She's awesome. Um, I was on the start of a treatment plan that would hopefully allow me to function. It wasn't necessarily the rousing success that my doctors had hoped for, but it helped. They were not happy. I was ecstatic. Botox reduced my major migraines attacks from 6 to 7 per week down to 2 or 3. That's amazing. I went from pretty much a constant migraine, major migraine, to 2 or 3. I was happy. My daily migraines, what I call a minor migraine that I live with 24/7, went from a 4 or 5 on average down to a 2 or a 3. And I realized those numbers aren't necessarily qualitative, but anybody who's been through chronic pain has a pain scale. Um, Apply those to your pain scale. It helps you make sense. I was, I don't know, not necessarily happy or content, but I was better than I was. My doctors were still frustrated though. In 2012, my disability insurance dropped me. Um, they said it was a mental health issue, not a neurological issue, mainly based on an early psychological report done way back when we were still trying to figure out what the heck was wrong. Um, in 2013, my Social Security disability started paying, and my disability insurance miraculously accepted me back in 2014. And they took me just long enough to get their money back and then dropped me again in 2016, again citing mental health issues for which I was no longer for the reason why I was no longer able to work. By the way, I'd like to point out right now that not being able to work is one of the worst things in my life. I would love to be able to work. I loved my job. I loved what I was doing. I hate sitting at home. I hate staring at the window and only being able to watch the birds fly past. That's all I can do. It hurts too much to even process any other information. It sucks. Um, at the end of 2015, my regular doctor retired. Right after giving me a great Christmas present in diabetes. Yeah, it's not really his fault that I got diabetes, but I found out on Christmas Eve. What a rotten way to start Christmas. Um, I eventually settled on a new doctor through my wife's work. She works for the same company that I'd used to, and they have their own health clinic. Um, After some working with her, she starts to push us down some new avenues. And in spring of 2017, she suggested I go to the Mayo Clinic. Uh, by this time, I'm done being poked and prodded and tested and looked at and told nothing was wrong. Um, my life may not have been perfect. It's still not. I'm still trying to deal with basically this major loss. But I could live with my life. Uh, but she talks me into giving it a shot. So in July of 2017, I head to the Mayo Clinic's neurology department. This was after being shuffled back and forth and around for a while as people tried to figure out who was going to see me. Um, The neurologist there again decides it's migraines, but at least this time he did a full workup on me first. Um, but he's got a few other additional issues that were thrown in. The big one is PPPD. Uh, don't ask. I don't remember what the acronym stands for. Um, and frankly, it doesn't matter. But triple PD is what's causing my dizziness. This is why, especially when I get the bad migraines, the dizziness gets worse. And while the migraines may have initially caused the PPPD, it's now functioning pretty much completely on its own. My notes hit a little bugger, which is actually pretty accurate. Um, so while the neurologist can't fix me, he can't even really change anything's going on because I've got a pretty good regimen going. He does suggest that I go attend the pain rehab clinic to find out how to live with it. And so I took his advice and did. And PRC was a success mostly. Um, I got great advice and I met great people. Um, it took a while. Some things felt not quite right, um, mainly because I didn't have pain like everybody else did. I had symptoms and they were coming from migraines, but yeah. Eventually, I just gave in. Decided to rather focus on the fact that I didn't have pain, focus on the fact that I had symptoms, and just substitute that word symptoms in for whenever somebody said pain. And it worked out pretty well after that. I learned some tricks, I learned some tips, I learned some methodologies, I learned some tactics. Um, I learned ways to cope. I learned ways to survive, and I even learned ways to thrive. Um, Things are getting better, and we'll see how they go from here. So I realize I've gone a long time, and I know we're not supposed to talk about this, especially at PRC, but I'm not at PRC, so I'm going to discuss my symptoms a little bit, um, mainly to help people kind of understand. As stated, I don't have pain. Zero, none, zilch, nada, whatever word you want to use. Well, not really. I do get increasing amounts of pressure in my head, um, but it's not the sharp stabbing pain that's normally associated with migraines. Um, Honestly, I don't know if I could have survived that. I probably would have killed myself a long time ago because they are bad enough without the pain that I couldn't have handled it with. Um, I do have the following symptoms, which I've just split into two major categories. Major symptoms, these are life changing, day halting, really scary sometimes symptoms, and minor annoyances, frustrating, really more annoying than anything else, sometimes a little scary. Um, so, first, the major symptoms. The big one and my major downfall is an inability to concentrate or focus. Um, this is more than just scatterbrained. I literally can't make my mind focus on anything. I can kind of think stuff, I can kind of do stuff, but really it's just mindless and repetitive. And I can tell you right now, it better not be important because there's no guarantee that I'm actually doing it the way or saying it the way that I think I am. So the biggest damage to me is this means my brain is shutting down, and it in the process it's taking away some of the most Doug defining things that there are. Um, I'm not smart anymore, and I have all the intelligence I gained, but I can't access it. Um, I can't do my job or use my education because of that inability to focus or concentrate. Uh, Most of my hobbies revolved around mental exercise, logic puzzles, reading, painting, all of that stuff requires focus and concentration, and I can't do any of it. And in a lot of ways, just the ability for self control and discipline gets affected. You have to be able to focus and concentrate to tell yourself not to give in to your desires, not to do something that you want to do, including go down at midnight and get donuts. Yes, that used to happen quite often. Um, it's a lot more life changing than that might sound on the surface. The next is I'm really, really slow to process information. This may seem like the same one above, but it's not really. Uh, this this affects my speech. Um, a lot of times I can't actually figure out what I'm trying to say, even when I'm trying to say it. I've lost a train of my thought while I'm saying the words. Um, it also means that it's hard for me to move that information from my brain to my mouth. It's a hard it's a hard thing for me to do, to find the words to hold a conversation. And even harder to remember what the person said back to me so I can actually hold a conversation. Um, this slow process of information really affects my memory. Um, I don't remember lots of things. Expecting to remember me things from several days ago or even yesterday, especially if I had a migraine, is pretty fruitless. Um, as the migraines get worse, this this especially increases dramatically. It's one of the things that is very obvious to people, because it affects my mood, and it affects my speech, and it affects the way I interact. This also affects the way that I learn. Um, Honestly, I almost can't. It takes forever. It takes multiple iterations. It takes repetition. It takes doing things over and over and over and over again, which has never happened to me. I used to be able to pick up anything that I wanted to quickly. First pass, maybe two, and I could do it. I could once multiply four-digit numbers in my head. All of that's gone. The last one is my balance. Um, I like to say that I have better control of that now, but realistically, I don't. I just recognize the signs quicker. Um, Frankly, my balance is like trying to walk on water, which is actually a pretty good analogy. Um, at one time, I likened it to being in the ocean. You're out in the waves, and you're out in the waves, and they're pushing at you and rocking you back and forth. Your feet aren't on the ground. You're at the mercy of the waves, but you've got a good idea of what up is because you can see up. But you're still getting rocked back and forth, and you're continually having to. Yeah, so you'll see a little bit of a change in perspective here. I ran out of memory, so I had to start over, or not start over, but at least start up again. So, yeah, so out in the ocean, big waves knocking you around. One of the things that is uh, definitely prevalent is you have to continually readjust yourself. Uh, this actually takes quite a bit of brain power. Um, However, then a big wave comes and hits you from behind. You aren't prepared for it. You didn't even see it coming, and you go under, and you're spinning head over heels. Um, you're under the water. You have no way of knowing which way is up, which way is down, and really all you're trying to do is survive. Now, eventually you figure it out, and you get back to up, and you're doing okay. But until you do, life is really scary. Um, this is pretty consistent of what happens with me. Um, Now those big waves don't come as often anymore, but they still come a lot more often than I'd like them to. What this means for my life is that I don't get to do things like I used to anymore, like riding a bike. Um, I've actually tried this and it doesn't work very well. I've even fallen off of exercise bikes. Um, and things that you wouldn't think of, like using a ladder. I actually can't take my feet being off the ground. It's really bad for me. And it also actually being in water can be scary too because water has a current and you're never really sure of your footing and your balance, and so you're never sure when you're going to go under. I've gotten better at all of these things, but there's still issues. Um, the minor symptoms um, are next. Uh, One of the obvious ones and most common is my body temperature regulation. Um, Depending on how bad the migraine is, I get hot and cold flashes, or hot or cold flashes. And sometimes I'll get them in rapid succession where I'll just change body temperature up and down really fast. My wife jokingly says that I'm going through menopause, and I laugh with her, and I even like the joke, um, mainly because otherwise it's pretty scary. Um, Not quite sure how or why this happens, but I could be bundled up in a blanket, sweats, and a sweater and still be cold on a 90-degree day. Um, or I could be sitting around in shorts and a t-shirt and sweating in a 40-degree day. And I don't care what my son says, this is not normal. Um, the really scary part happens, though, when part of me is having a hot flash and part of me is having a cold flash. Uh, that's pretty screwed up no matter who you are. Um, I also have a lot of shaking and trembling. Um, I start losing motor skills, especially in my hands, my left hand in particular. Um, I'm just about always trembling or shaking in some way. It's part of the migraine reaction. But as the migraines get worse, the trembling becomes much more pronounced. PRC says that the calls the trembling pain behaviors, and so I try to control them because that's what you're supposed to do. But I'm not really sure. They actually take more effort to try to minimize them than they take to just let them happen. Um, they happen without thought or without effort at all. It's trying to minimize them that hurts. Some of the other little things that happen is I get an eye irritation, especially in my left eye. It'll tear up, it'll sting, it gets painful at weird moments. Um, Typically 1 or 2 times a day, sometimes more often, sometimes I won't have any at all. Um, it it's annoying and a little frustrating, but it's not much else. Um, there was another one that I just thought of that I actually can't remember right now. This is what happens when you get migraines. At least me. So anyway, I hope this was informative. I hope you now have a little bit more of an understanding of how I got this way, and and I look forward to talking with you guys about this in the future. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the other side.